You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text and Glossa House TV. I am Michael Halcomb, and today I have the great privilege of talking with Dr. Robert Holmstedt. He is a professor of Hebrew Bible and West Semitic languages at the University of Toronto in Canada. I've never been to Toronto. How's Toronto these days?
It's busy
Is it?
and growing. Yeah.
Right on. So, how long have you been at the University of Toronto?
We went up in 2005, so 19 years. Just finished my 19th year.
Wow, excellent. You've so on your faculty page it says you teach biblical or your areas of interest, biblical Hebrew syntax, and you were a co-author with one of my former professors, John Cook. Yeah,
That's correct.
you all did a pretty creative Hebrew grammar together, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that came out of long conversations. John and I met in grad school, and it became a friendly but intense competition. and who would even on exams for courses, I had him over to my house in the Niagara region. Actually, it was the week before COVID hit 4 years ago. And he sat around. It's the first time he'd really been around a lot of my younger children. And he sat at the dinner table and he told slightly inaccurate stories about how he would beat me by half a point or a point or, and then some quite accurate and crazy stories about preparing for our comprehensive exams for our PhDs. So we've been working on issues of Hebrew language and Hebrew Bible with each other for a long time. And we have a lot of projects ongoing. But that Hebrew textbook was a product of both of us teaching at Wisconsin in a fabulous program that is now defunct, sadly, and wanting something better. And in a lot of ways, all of the language book informed when I informed my teaching methods when I started teaching GIS at the University of Toronto. And that's why, like the Hebrew textbook, where we use illustrated biblical scenes, we had to hire an illustrator for that.
Right.
A guy named Philip Williams, who produced some fabulous illustrations specifically for us. In this case, I found Glossa House's illustration of the Gospel of Mark. And I thought, well, that's what I want to do. And I was using Mark for the GIS class. And there's a long story behind that too, but it all fit together pretty well.
Awesome. So we've just released, Glossa House has just released Dr. Holmstedt's book, Early Ethiopic. And so if you're listening, watching, I actually, at the time of recording, I woke up this morning, it's still morning here in Hawaii. I think 5 copies or so already have gone out this morning. So that's pretty cool to see that, to wake up to that. And, I think it's going to be a great resource. So, Early Ethiopic, an introduction with exercises. If you go to glossahouse.com, you can see it right there. It's on sale right now. And you click that, you can go, see some sample pages, I think, as well, a description, perhaps. But yeah, so if those of you who are watching are familiar with our illustrated volumes, like Illustrated Mark in Greek, or, we have the Hebrew ones too, Dr. Holmstedt has used a number of the images from that in the grammar, but there's also some other beautiful images throughout the grammar, or throughout the book. What is it on, like cowhide or leather or whatever it is? Like you have some pictures of Ge'ez on I don't know, where'd you source those from? Like, did you just take pictures yourself, or? Yeah.
Well, that's part of the background to the textbook. I have a colleague at the University of Toronto, and his name is Michael Jervers, and he's a medieval historian. But back in the late 90s, he became He's never told me the full story, why he became interested in Ethiopia, but
Mm.
he ended up Ethiopia and Eritrea a number of times, and he's really kind of an equivalent to Indiana Jones in the sense that Michael would go and rappel into some of those hard to get to monasteries, and he secured the monks' permission to photograph items.
Wow.
And in his, in a couple different trips, one of the times he was able to secure the permission to photograph a set of manuscripts from the Abba Grima monastery, and it turned out to be the four Gospels, and they had been photographed years and years ago and were microfilm, which you can get through the Hill Memorial Virtual Library that's in Minnesota. But they were older images, and Micah was able to take some fabulous images as a monk was sitting there holding all of these pages one by one open.
Wow. Wow.
And the kind of sad part of the story is that, and he's fully given me permission to use those, and I use those in my teaching, and they're truly fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
With a little bit of practice on, I don't use Photoshop, I use another one, but a little practice on editing, I can orient them properly because they aren't all straight, and you got this big
Right.
thick thumb in the corners. The monk is holding them down. But a few years later, they were photographed again, and those photographs are in the Hill Memorial virtual collection, and they were done under much better light conditions. But because this bound kind of collection, and they're not even on the right order, the manuscript pages, etc., because the monks didn't really use this. It was just part of their collection. The ones that were photographed about 5 years after Michael's actually have degraded. And Michael has better images of some of the letters and some of the pages than the more recent photographs. I've done a lot
Wow.
of comparison online between the
Wow.
photos that I have on my hard drive, because he gave me all of his high-res photos, and online, and it's truly a gift. And so not only out of interest, professional, but also because I feel a real debt to Michael for drawing me into this and letting me use these. I use them as much as possible, and I'm really
Yeah.
interested in this particular collection because the frontispieces, the photographs of or not the photos, the paintings of each of the um, gospel writers are incredible.
Mm.
And there's other aspects of these besides the text. The text itself has all sorts of interesting features. They're the earliest by 600 to 700 years, because the next datable gospels in Ethiopic and Ge'ez are actually early 12th century. And these
Really?
are
Wow.
somewhere between 4th and 6th, and I tend towards, kind of late 4th century in my estimation. And so they're incredibly important historical artifact, and they show some linguistic features that are unique. Scribal conventions hadn't really settled in some cases. So you have some interesting spellings, and I talk about one in the paper I'm writing. It's about names with someone, and how even the name Moses is written in these early Gospels versus the ones that you end up getting 600 to 700 years later, and then they become
Mm.
conventionalized. Canon tables, for instance, canon tables were important in
Yeah.
early Christian and biblical scribal practices. The canon tables in the Abba Gospels haven't really been fully studied, and they show some fascinating differences from other known canon tables. And
Huh.
it's a piece of research that simply hasn't been done. But I've
Right.
looked at them, and I've looked at some articles on early canon tables, and there are differences. So
Mm.
this is just a rich, um, it's not a large body because it's only the four gospels and there's three collections, and unfortunately not all the gospels in each of the collections is complete in terms of the pages.
Oh.
I don't think Michael himself was aware of that, and I've gone through and identified every page of each of them, and he's told me more than once that I have all of his photographs, and he took pictures of every page
Mm.
in that bound volume that the monks let him photograph, and they aren't all there. So, and they're not all in order. So I think the monks were missing some. Michael joked
Interesting.
not too long ago when I had lunch with him that it might have been early scholars running off with a page here and there, which
Hmm.
sadly is probably likely.
Wow. So the we have an incomplete set of gospels. Has that been printed anywhere other than on the digital website, the library that you're talking about, or no?
No, that's a fascinating component of all of this is that when you get into Ethiopic studies, the focus is on textual criticism, a great deal of it, and some codicology, but the codicology serves, in my opinion, the way I've been reading it is kind of an outsider or a newcomer to the field, serves the text critical goals.
Hmm.
And so you have critical editions of the Ethiopic Gospels have been done for Mark and Matthew and John, but not Luke, if I'm correct. And there's been a lot of work on other text critical issues. But what that means is that they're not really interested in producing editions, faithful editions of each of these manuscripts. That's probably considered just a waste of time.
Hmm.
The problem with this is that in the case of the text that I'm talking about, the Abhagrima Gospels, and we call them Abhagrima 1, Abhagrima 2, and Abhagrima 3, because there are three sets, is that in terms of being historical artifacts, they're invaluable. And they do show some differences. And this hasn't been investigated. I'm just starting to do it because this is an interest of mine. And I've run into some uh, uh, there's some lack of interest in the kinds of things that I'm interested in because I think that they're not valued through the eyes, like historians' eyes or
Oh,
philologists' eyes, like I see these things. So often the things I'm looking at have been dismissed in the critical editions as scribal errors. But when a particular feature is consistent through an entire book, like the book of Mark, it's not an error.
right, right.
That's
Choice.
that's a practice.
Yeah.
That's a choice. It's a convention. Well, you have to call it something other than error. And I think these give us evidence about the development of Gez, about the development of Ethiopic scribalism. I think they even tell us quite a bit that the carbon dating on a piece of the manuscript that had put them in the 4th to 6th centuries is, in fact, correct.
Hmm.
There's all sorts of interesting features in this. And uh, that's all of these things suggest that there should be printed or better digital editions of these, but there hasn't been. And in fact, one scholar who was anonymous who was giving me a review of an article that I wrote, which was turned down because it was too provocative for the field. One anonymous reviewer said, "Why? People can just read the manuscripts." But
Hmm.
that's the point: is that the access to these isn't great, and people don't read the manuscripts that well. And there are some features of the manuscripts that I've had two different trained Ethiopians, trained in Ethiopic philology, read through manuscripts for me. And because they're so, in fact, both of them, well, one of them, but then another third person were trained deacons in the Ethiopic church, because they're so used to reading received text,
Hmm.
they read right over the error, not the errors. They read right over the differences. And
Oh,
so
interesting.
I and another student, not trained, who was in Semitics, but not trained specifically in kind of the Ethiopic tradition, have had to go through and correct, as we make our own digital text of Mark, correct the analysis of a number of things that my
Wow.
first graduate students, performed.
Wow, interesting. Well, maybe that's a future project, getting a print version of those manuscript images out. That'd be interesting. Well, for those who may be watching or listening, what is Ge'ez? And it's sort of started to boom in the last decade within biblical studies, I think. I mean, it's been around a while, but I've noticed in the last decade, really, it's kind of like taken off. So, what is Ge'ez, and why should anyone be interested?
Well, Giz is an it's a West Semitic language. It depends on where you put it in the whole in the whole Semitic language family. Some people actually put it as a sister language to Central Semitic in the way that they break the tree down. And Central Semitic would include Arabic as well as the Northwest Semitic grouping, which has Hebrew and Ugaritic and Aramaic. So it's an important language if you're coming at this as a Semitist, if you're interested in ancient Semitic languages. One Syriologist who's a colleague of mine told me years ago when I first taught Giz in a summer course back in 2010 or 2011, just as with some really sharp students. It was just a fun summer reading. I mentioned what I was doing. He said, well, yeah, if you're going to do comparative Semitics, you absolutely have to. And for him coming from Akkadian, it was obvious that you couldn't just, have one West Semitic language like Arabic or Hebrew or say Ugaritic or Aramaic. You needed Ethiopic as
Mm,
well. Because it provides some differences. It attests to some differences between the other West Semitic languages, and it kind of, in some ways, bridges and doesn't bridge between Akkadian and the other West Semitic languages. I think it's actually fairly complicated. I'm not sure that your listeners might be too interested in, but it's also an important Christian language. I mean, it has a pre-Christian background. In fact, the earliest inscriptions are fabulous. They lead up to then in the kingdom of Aksum in the 4th century, the conversion of Ezana, who was a king at that time, to Christianity, and his pre-Christian inscriptions mention, his devotion to different gods, and then the post-Christian inscriptions mention his devotion to the one
mm,
Lord. So, you know, it's one of these fabulous kind of snapshots of a culture because of the king's conversion that goes through a religious transformation,
mm,
and that's part of what gives us access to studying this ancient Ethiopic language. It also gives us access to a part of the world that was really important in the medieval period and is
mm,
neglected by most medievalists because it's not Europe.
mm,
But in fact, there was a massive amount of trade that went through the waters, that Ethiopia sits on the west side of, and
right.
Yemen sits on the east side of. But in fact, the culture at that point in what we now call Yemen in Ethiopia, they had a long set of relationships going back centuries, and they controlled a lot of the water trade that was actually coming out of Europe and going around the Horn of Africa, not around the
Mm,
Horn of Africa, but going around India
mm-hmm,
and connecting to further east. And so the Silk Road, but there's also this water road that was important. Um, and Ethiopia was critical in that.
mm,
So it's important for so many language, religious, historical reasons that I'm surprised that it hasn't been studied more. Now, the great Semitists of the 19th and 20th century, of course, studied Ethiopic, and it actually goes back further than that. You mentioned some of the pages that I included in my textbook, and I actually included a psalm out of the earliest printed Ethiopic work, which was, can I remember the date? It was a printed Ethiopic Psalter dating from, I think, 1653. So
mm,
very early on in the world of printing. And that was actually used by permission of there was an exhibition one of the first years I taught Ethiopic formally at the University of Toronto in 2017. Had just finished an exhibition at I want to say it's University College London, but it might be King's College. Yeah, I'm going to get that one wrong.
Sorry.
But anyway, they're in their museum, the people there that had run the exhibition sent me a massive PDF and let me use it for teaching purposes that they had scanned, and it's no longer available anywhere online. I've looked
Hmm.
and was like, I have this incredible resource. It's beautiful, and it attests to the importance. I mean, early in the life of the printing press, all of a sudden someone developed Ethiopic, type and printed the entire
Right.
Ethiopic Psalter. That's impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially given the Hebrew or the Ge'ez script or the Ethiopic script, right? The Abugida and uh like that's a pretty intensive
It is.
thing you're having developed there. Yeah.
You have to create a lot of type characters for that
Yes.
because of the way that the alphabet is modified for each vowel.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm curious to see, in the next few years where Ethiopic studies, as far as in like relation to biblical studies, end up. But I think this will be your book is going to be a great resource to get people, into that, and I think it's sorely needed. There's quite a few Amharic books out there. I've written a couple of those, an introduction to Amharic, and really just trying to help people learn the alphabet. That's a huge hump to get over. But having been to Ethiopia more than a half dozen times, obviously like Orthodox Christianity, Eastern Orthodox is huge there, and um, you know, I think there is a growing interest among Ethiopians themselves, like a sort of resurgence of interest in this. That's another thing I've noticed at like SBL conferences in the last several years. A growing number of Ethiopic students and scholars taking an interest in their own, uh, language, history, this sort of thing. So, yeah, it's good to see that. Um,
Yeah,
and what?
there's a couple trends that are interesting about that. I mean, the first one is just the accessibility of
Right.
resources to work with. I mean, there have been there has been some interesting work on again, text criticism. There's major centers in Italy and of course at Hamburg in Germany and a few other places in the U.S. There was some work at Duke and of course Catholic University of America where Aaron Butts was, although now he's in Hamburg. And even at Toronto before we started offering it because of Michael Gervers. But it was kind of this small, very peripheral niche field.
Right.
It's I think the in terms of the curricular, the adding of his courses in North America, et cetera, has to do with the large diaspora community coming out of
Yeah.
Ethiopia and Eritrea. And it's been obviously some very difficult years over there.
Yeah. Yep.
And you have people who are able come through Europe and sometimes come all the way over, and so you have scholars, and you have just normal undergraduate kids for whom this is a heritage language.
Yeah.
There's something is spoken at home, whether it's Tigrinya or Amharic, and they want to learn something about what they're hearing maybe on Sundays, because it's the deacon will get up or the priest will get up and recite the passages, but not too many people are
Right.
processing it because they
Right.
don't know Giz. But I've also noticed on the backside, because of the way that modern scholarship, or I'm not sure what we call the scholarship of the last 20 years, screwy scholarship sometimes, but there's been a certain labeling of the study of Ethiopic by the likes of someone like me. It's
Hmm.
kind of it's lumped in with post-colonial scholarship,
Hmm.
and that can not only inspire, I think, Ethiopian scholars, which may be a good thing. It can also, in some ways, as I've noticed in a few of the things I've participated in, it can discourage others from really engaging in the field.
Right.
So yeah, there's weird things going on, pretty much like every field.
Well, you've got another resource coming down the pipe with Glossa House as well. Talk a little bit about that if you would.
Well, that's actually the use of the Mark, the full illustrated
Yes,
manuscript.
in its
Yeah,
in its
and
entirety.
it's an
Yeah,
entirety. That's right. So that's that digital edition of Abhagrima 3 Mark, the same one that I used the first three chapters out of in the textbook. We've been trying to clean up the digital version, clean up because of what I mentioned earlier with some of my earlier grad
yeah.
students who are kind of reading over scribal differences. And that's the production of a digital text that's not just the text, but it's also got a full set of morphological and tags that I can search. I work with the Accordance software a lot, and I have for
Mm,
years because of a Hebrew database that and syntax that I developed with them. So I use their tags, and it means I can search for things, which is fun. And we are most of the way through chapter 14 at really cleaning up and nailing down
wow,
that text. And once I'll finish it, then I'll put that all in that full illustrated Mark manuscript. And then what you'll have is an illustration of the Gospel of Mark using uh, using the text from the historical artifact of Abhagrima 3, Gospel of Mark.
amazing. Yeah,
So it's not an eclectic text. It'd be a
right.
diplomatic text and one that no one else has.
Wow, interesting. Um, so do you have any other, you mentioned that you've got some ongoing projects. I don't know what you're at liberty to talk about, but as we sort of wrap up here, what what do you have on the horizon that you're able to speak about?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, COVID, and slammed the brakes on so much just
Mm,
because of the
yeah.
malaise that sets in when you stare at the screen too much. And then my dad had COVID, and that kind of threw me for a loop for a while, and a variety of other things. But there's a lot that's actually coming out. So earlier this year, I finished an edition of Phoenician and Punic texts with Aaron Shade and Phil Schmitz. Aaron's at Brigham Young, and Phil is retired from Eastern Michigan University. And
Mm,
that's with the SBL Writings from the Ancient World series. And that was a huge project, 13 years in the making.
my
Fabulous.
gosh.
I did line
Wow.
drawings for all the texts that we could possibly do, and be a great, I think, scholarly and student tool. And I'm trying to finish up writing an introduction to syntactic analysis of biblical Hebrew for Baker to go with a lot of the books that John Cook and I have done together.
Mm,
And it's not just like a Hebrew syntax reference. It's how we study things. Like if we're faced with this question. So another topic that caught my interest was what's called falsidafa, which is where you have the lack of agreement, say, between a noun and an adjective with the use of the definite article. And the typical Hebrew textbooks say that if the noun is definite, the adjective's got to be definite. Well, that doesn't always occur. And so the question is, when you're faced with something like that, how do you approach it?
mm,
Linguistically, how do you approach this question with the aim of figuring out what's going on? And so, that's supposed to be done this summer.
mm.
John and I are writing another Baylor handbook on Isaiah 40 to 55, where we do verse by verse grammatical analysis. John and I are editing a introduction to linguistics for Hebraists that has contributions by something like 10 different scholars from around the world,
Great.
and is going to be very good. That one's lagging just a lot because of COVID and because one or two people haven't contributed their articles, and it's been
That's
four or 5 years, which is just a warning about an edited project.
yeah, that's
Sometimes they
right.
just
It's so true.
oh. And
uh,
I love writing textbooks, so I also wrote. I've written, and it's coming out, the first textbook, and there's a second textbook on biblical Hebrew, but it's aimed at the upper middle school / high school audience for a homeschool class out of Louisville, Kentucky, called Memoria Press.
oh wow.
And yeah,
Wow.
so
Excellent.
there's just tons of things going on. They're all
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, Dr. Homestead, it's good to meet you. I'm excited about the projects you've got going on, especially with Glosa House, and those other things sound interesting too. Um, we'll have a link to your book in the description and here. And yeah, is there a place where folks can sort of keep up with you on social media? You do that? Not really.
I'm too old. I don't I don't do social media. I have a hard time keeping up with my own thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, unfortunately not.
All right. Well, they can check out your faculty page there at University of Toronto and
Yeah. Then
keep
they
up
can
with
always
some of the
email me
stuff.
and ask me what I'm doing. I usually
Yeah.
respond to people.
They can get in touch with you. Yeah. And so certainly they could go through Glow's House to reach you too. So that's great. But man, thanks for all the work you're doing. Really grateful. And yeah, for those of you watching, head over to glowshouse.com, pick up a copy of that book. We always have great resources coming out. We try to get a couple books a month at least. And sometimes we do more than that. But you can check out Prove Text Well, which is the audio version of the podcast, and Glowshouse TV, which is the video version of the podcast over on YouTube. That's really starting to take off. So we're really grateful to everybody who's supporting us. And yeah, we're going to stop there, friends, and say we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glosa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glosa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glosahouse.com today. Glosa House, language resources for the global community.